All right, welcome back and thank you for staying with us. We are getting into our Take Note conversation, which is centered around protecting children from child labor. Let me give you a brief preamble into this conversation. Now, almost 1 in 10 of all children worldwide are in child labor. Yes, you heard me right. Now, while the number of children in child labor has declined by 94 million since 2000, the rate of the reduction has slowed by 2/3 in recent years. So the officials shall be telling us, why are we noticing a reduction in the why are we noticing a rate of reduction by 2/3 in recent years? Yes, they'll be trying to tell us why that is. And in Uganda, the number of children in labor is 2 million. That number is so huge. How can the world community get firmly on track toward eliminating child labor? That is the $64,000 question. And to speak to us about this and more, we have Mr. Alex Asimwe, the Commissioner of Labor, Industrial Relations and Productivity at the Ministry of Gender, Labor and Social Development, and Jacqueline Banya, she's the Program Officer at the International Labor Organization's Kampala office. A very good morning and thank you for joining us on Morning at NTV. First of all, I'll start with Ms. Jacqueline Banya. Help us understand what World Day Against Child Labor is all about.
Thank you very much, moderator, and all those who are viewing, good morning. The World Day Against Child Labor is marked 12th June since 2002. This is the day that the International Labor Organization has sanctioned as the day to be set aside for raising awareness and activism on the case of child labor, prevention of child labor. And of course, the International Labor Organization is comprised of governments, workers and employers of 187 member states. And they agree that every year since 2002, that we set aside this single day to create more awareness at all levels, right from the global, the regional, national and the community level, on the dangers of child labor and how it affects productivity and socio-economic development of nations.
And we also understand that while the number of children in child labor has declined by 94 million since 2000, the rate of reduction has actually slowed in recent years. We would like to understand why that is. Why is there a paradigm shift?
Right now, if we talk about statistics, the latest global statistics, which we quote, is the one of 2016, that set the global number at 152 million children in child labor globally. And out of this, apparently from 2016, because every 4 years we have a global report, in 2016, the figure was much higher. It was 246 million children. And we experienced actually a reduction globally. In 2016, it was down to 152 million children. And out of these, 73 million out of the 152 million are children in hazardous work, what we call hazardous forms of work. And you would say that globally there was a reduction, but this is not the case. The situation is now worrying. That is why you see the theme for this year, COVID-19, protect children now more than ever, because the situation is getting worse. It's getting out of hand. More children, looks like the progress which was being made is there's a regression now. We are afraid that the goal that has been set globally, the SDG, Sustainable Development Goal, sets it that by 2025, we should have dealt with all forms of child labor. We are afraid that we will not make this target.
Indeed. Mr. Alex, you're representing the Ministry of Gender, Labor and Social Development. Like you've heard from Ms. Jacqueline, we are regressing in the fight against child labor. Now, I would like to understand, first of all, what is the situation like in Uganda with regards to child labor? Paint for us a picture.
Thank you. One is that child labor is now a national issue and a community concern, because the recent data we have from National Labor Force Survey done by Uganda Bureau of Statistics indicates that about 2 million children are in child labor, and 70% of those children are in agriculture, and the rest are in mining, domestic work, and services. Now, it is also important to know that when we talk about child labor, many people do not understand because they confuse it with light work. You know, child labor is that work that physically, mentally, socially, or morally, that when it is done by these children, impedes their growth, impedes their progress, that is harmful and dangerous to their health and safety. Now, when you look at that definition, that understanding, and look at the numbers that we have, it is very clear that most of the children are being affected, are not in schools, because it is one way. Once children are in child labor, it definitely impedes their schooling system, their schooling career. And importantly, these children, majority who are girls, are more vulnerable. The girls are sometimes exposed to sexual exploitation, trafficking, you know, cross-border illegal trade. Now, these are the issues that are of great concern, and we think it is time now that we address it. And just join it with that, because government we recognize that this is a problem. That's why we are intensifying in improving our education system, putting in place a program called UPE, and ensuring that every time this program continues to improve in terms of delivering quality education to our children.
Mr. Alex, despite labor laws and other interventions that you've mentioned, like UPE, Universal Primary Education, we continue to see a rise in the number of children in labor at 2 million now. Why is that?
You know, actually, we have done well. We need it because the recent data is of 2016-17. And now, soon we will be undertaking another study, another assessment to tell us where we are. But previously, the numbers were more than, 2 million. Now, some of these cases that we see, the 2 million, emanate from some of the unexpected situations that come into our way in the process of executing our development path agenda. When you look at, for example, like floods, natural disasters, they displace people and they make them vulnerable. You have seen in many cases drought. Drought affects families, they move, and some people think that once they have children, it could be a source of labor, to provide an income.
And recover.
And recover. But also, because of the globalization, we have seen a slight increase in gender-based violence. Particularly now when you look at like this COVID, people are supposed to stay together, wife and husband and children, but instead some families are becoming centers of fights, and that also social breakdown of these families leads to children sometimes to find their way in sexual exploitation, in work that is illegal, and that's why, as government, we have been able to put in place, first of all, a very serious and robust legal policy and institutional framework. Right away from the Constitution, Article 34, it's very clear. Children are prohibited from employment. The Children Act, Section 8. The Employment Act, Section 32. They are very, very clear. And even, I think Ugandans also need to know that the problem we've been having is the mindset of our people. They confuse light work and child labor. Some parents think that for a child to grow up in a more resilient manner must do hard and manual work. And that has a consequence on the life of the child, and the impacts are very grave.
Of course, at this point in time, we would like also to know what the Ministry of Gender, Labour and Social Development and government as a whole is doing to alleviate the negative circumstances that are forcing the families or households to actually fall back on their children as sources of labor. So we shall get into that after Ms. Jacqueline tells us what are the effects of child labor on children in Uganda. Ms. Jacqueline, what are the effects?
Thank you very much. I think that the Commissioner has touched quite a bit on these effects. And
like the girl child.
Yes, especially. And if you look at the definition of child labor, it's work that interferes with schooling of a child and affects a child mentally, you know, physically. Education is key. And this work is harmful, it's exploitative, it's dangerous to a child's physical, mental, spiritual, moral, and social development. And on the basis of the international standards, because with the International Labour Organization, we set these standards, and these standards define what the situation of child labor is. If we go by that, we see that the mental development of children is affected. Education, we talk about COVID-19, because this is around the theme. What is happening now with the lockdown, with so many children out there, especially those in the rural community. You just heard the Commissioner saying agriculture happens to be 70% in terms of what the station child laborers, 70% of them are in agriculture. And then with the lockdown, the situation is getting worse, because children ideally should be in a learning environment. So education is key. Once you lock that out, this is the protective, safe, you know, environment that you think they can have. They're learning, and they're not in child labor, they're learning, they're schooling. Schooling is, in fact, the principal occupation for children. But that is not happening. It means, therefore, that what are they doing? If you go out now, you find that it's planting season. Most children are in the gardens instead of learning in the rural community. And we're saying they're not just doing light work for very long hours for it to qualify. It's dangerous work for them. It's not appropriate for their age. At the same time, it's compromising their education. The lockdown is bad enough, and then the situation at home is not helping. So ultimately, educational outcomes are affected. Their health, their safety, there's a lot of danger. Some of them are subjected to carrying heavy loads, and this affects their physical development. And morally, you heard what is happening in the domestic scene, the domestic violence that is being meted on children and women. And let me also mention some men. What is happening, the effect on children, that morally, they're not okay, upright. Emotionally, they're not stable. And this affects the entire development of a child. The whole being of a child is affected. And when we look at it, the convention examines it in totality. I must say that the government of Uganda ratified key conventions, international standards, the UN Convention on the Rights of the Child. We have also the African Charter on the Rights of the Child. Other than that, we have ILO conventions, number 182 on the elimination, protection of children from worst forms of child labor. And we have another convention, number 138, that sets a minimum age of entry into work. I'm mentioning all these because they've been ratified by our government. But if that was sufficient, we would not be having this situation. But all of them, all these standards I have mentioned that are set, spells it very clearly that every child has a right to be protected from exploitation. Every child has a right to education, to be protected from physical, moral, spiritual, all these things that I have mentioned along those lines. So we are saying that now, in reality, we need data to back us up. We cannot talk without evidence.
Indeed.
We are quoting data of 2016. Now, with this COVID, a rapid assessment is ongoing. We're documenting a rapid assessment on the effects of COVID-19 on families, because it's grossly affecting livelihoods in the households, because incomes are coming down, jobs are lost. What then happens? Some of these children are forced, in fact, out of survival to work, and some of them are becoming alternative source of cheap labor. Parents are taking advantage of the COVID situation to exploit these children, because if they're not in learning, what else are they doing? So what I'm trying to say here is that the whole thing is just connected. And we cannot blame it all on COVID because the situation was already bad enough. We are saying the COVID is making it, what we are making an alarm.
So this is a pre-existing problem that was only compounded by COVID-19.
Exactly.
But then we would like to understand, if there are so many laws that have been ratified to eliminate child labor, why do we continue to see the same? But that aside, we would like to know, what is the International Labour Organization doing to eliminate child labor in Uganda and the world as a whole?
Well, this is interesting. I must repeat that the International Labour Organization is about setting standards because the whole overall goal is social justice. There is no social justice in this world if you don't have decent living and working conditions for everyone anywhere in the world. Because what affects poverty in one part of the corner of the world affects the entire world, believe me. If during this COVID situation you have relatives that don't have and you have, they'll be knocking on your door. And believe me, you have to give.
You have to.
Humanly speaking, unless you don't have a heart. At the end of the day, what am I trying to say is this. At the international level, standards are set. These are the standards I'm mentioning. And when these standards are set, the International Labour Organization does not have a stick. Member states that I told you comprised of the government's
employees. They can only
employees.
advise.
They can, yes, they got to domesticate these standards now into the laws that the commissioner was elaborating. These standards have to be domesticated. And when they're domesticated, it doesn't stop there. They got to be enforced. Policies have to be implemented. We have a national child labor policy of 2006. We have a national action plan for the elimination of all forms of child labor. And the commissioner might be more competent to say something on that. But at my level, as the ILO, we will make sure that these things have to be domesticated. And therefore, when standards are now set, the assumption is that it should be domesticated once it is ratified. If a member state, like the case of Uganda, has ratified Standards Convention 138, the 182, we have the UN Convention on the Rights of the Child, the African Charter, name it. All these are standards, the global minimum that is set. And it's a really global minimum because if we take the case of minimum age of work, a 14-year-old is permitted to work. That's what the standard says, but not in hazardous work. When it comes to hazardous work, it's a no-go area for any child below the age of 18 because hazardous work is dangerous. It's detrimental to a child's health, physically, mentally, spiritually, physically, name it. And it's not good for the development of our nation. The future human resource of our nation is our children. And that's why we're saying protect them now, more than ever. Because believe me, the human resource of any nation is the source of its strength. Any organization, its human resource is the source of its strength. So what the ILO does, set the standards, right? And what we do, again, support, coming down on the ground. How does it reach the member states? Through action, we have technical cooperation programs. Those are the implementing arms that the ILO uses. In the case of Uganda, we've had a series of projects since 1999 in this country. And currently, we have a project that is named Accelerating Action on the elimination of child labor in the agricultural supply chains. Apparently, accelerating is the word we should use. We need to accelerate. When you're in a vehicle and you have to accelerate, this time we really got to accelerate. So what I'm saying is that what now the technical cooperation programs does, it works now with government on the ground. We can realize now these standards by supporting action programs by the government, by the workers, by the employers. We have civil society organizations, the NGOs that have different roles to play in this thing. Because the issue of child labor cannot be dealt with one actor. They're key players. Believe me, the employers are there doing their best. The workers have to do their best in the equation to make sure the workplaces are safe and they don't have children. On the other hand, also, what does the government do? The enforcement officials who are supposed to enforce. So all I'm trying to say that in a nutshell, there's hope that we will deal with COVID-19 and we also need to deal with child labor.
There is hope then, Ms. Jacqueline, very wonderful submission, but then we'd also like to know the issue of the young people who decide to drop out and decide to engage in work. Are they also protected by the International Labour Organization? That's another question after Mr. Alex actually submits to your engagement right there. She did point out a very good statement. She says laws have been ratified by the International Labour Organization, the United Nations, but then domestication of these laws has been a problem, and even implementation of the same laws to eliminate child labor. So in the case of Uganda, what is the government, especially the Ministry of Gender, Labor and Social Development, doing to eliminate child labor in its entirety from Uganda?
Yeah, thank you. I think first of all, we needed to understand that the issues of child labor, you can only address them properly when you use a multi-agency or multi-sectoral model. And as you know, the government of Uganda is focusing on increasing household income, wealth creation, because the idea is that once the household income has increased, then the families, the people in that family, the people in that household are able to, first of all, participate in the labor market, but also they are able to pay, to access social services that they deserve. So when you look at interventions, for instance, of ensuring that each village, each parish must have a primary school, each sub-county to have a secondary school, and you know, these measures have really increased, because you know our enrollment in primary is now around 80 million. That means that if we had not taken this issue seriously, we would have more children not in school. Now, but also when you look at the overall picture of government, of saying, can we first put in place serious fundamentals of the economy, of, you know, electricity, water, roads, you know, such that Ugandans can be able to participate in a business with, you know, with low cost. Now that in a way goes a long way in improving the incomes. Now, however, even that, you know, that national picture of the interventions that we are undertaking, we also recognize that we need to identify some targeted measures that are able to complement this, the holistic interventions that we put in place. What are these? Can we put place in a policy that is able to guide everybody? And also, this policy recognizes that child labor is a community problem and it needs interventions from every person. Remember, the law puts the duty on the parent to ensure that he is able or she is able to look after the child. Now, we also have what we call, we have improved our institutional framework. Like, for instance, we have over 150 labor officers across the country, because the labor officers, their mandate is to ensure that they withdraw these children from child labor, but also they can prosecute. They prosecute an employer who is found employing these children. So we have done that. Then we have also put in place what we call a robust awareness plan that involves private sector. In this case, we have Federation of Uganda Employers, we have workers' organizations, and the government, and definitely we have also the development partners. So in totality, the interventions that we have taken, they are those that are specific to child labor elimination, but they are also those ones that are indirectly helping to eliminate child labor if other sectors improve. For instance, if we improve on the area of business, of incomes, of employment, then in the long way, the families will be able to earn and be able to afford these social services, and they will not rely on the labor for their children. Yeah.
Ms. Jacqueline, do these measures that have been just pronounced by Mr. Alex go far enough to eliminate child labor, and also help us assess the real impact of COVID-19 on child labor and also forced labor?
I think maybe, I don't know whether I should start with the last bit. Assessing impact is not something you can tell in a short time. Impact is long term. It's not something we can measure now. And that is why earlier on I mentioned the rapid assessment. We need to do a thorough, comprehensive assessment of the impact of COVID-19 pandemic on children. And it's far-reaching. In the interim, already what we have, the reports we have, is what we can base on that indicates that more children are moving into child labor. International community, what we do as ILO, what he mentioned, the strengthening of partnerships. Partnerships also right at the international community, between the interagency at the UN level. The ILO working with UNICEF, working with FAO, working with IOM, strengthening that partnership. And in this, I would like to mention that we have the Alliance 8.7, which is the international partnership that has come up where we have UNICEF working hand in hand with the rest. As I speak now, there's a report that will be launched today, a joint report, in fact, done by UNICEF and ILO that I cannot talk about now because it's still under embargo. But just to mention that is about the effect of COVID-19 on children. And to just address what he's saying, those measures are not adequate. Certainly, they're not adequate because the interventions have to touch on education, have to touch on livelihoods, because the real root cause of this issue is poverty. What drives them is the driver. So the poverty issue, if we don't deal with livelihoods, if we don't deal with issues of people losing, so what happens now at the workplace? People should not lose their jobs. Therefore, they'll be able to afford, because now with so many out of work, being at home, some may not even afford. If today children are now, it's safe enough for them to go back to school. Some parents may not be able to afford, frankly speaking. And even those who could afford are now being, incapacitated. So what I'm trying to say exactly is that those measures, multi-sectoral, like the commissioner said, indeed we have to approach it from all angles. That's why we look at also working with the private sector and ensuring that they also are a big force in it. The Federation of Uganda Employers, the umbrella organization for workers, they do a lot for us in this equation. The workers, on the other hand, also have a key role that they play. So ILO, because I'm mentioning all this, because these are the constituents that the ILO works with.
Right.
And at the end of the day, what I'm trying to say is that if we don't strengthen the social protection systems, they're inadequate. We need social protection systems that will take care of the vulnerable families so that livelihoods are not tampered with during times of disaster and crisis like this. You can manage to survive. You can manage to put food on the table. So many who are hand to mouth are not able to make it. You wake up in the morning, they don't know what tomorrow brings. And here are desperate children. What happens in that situation? Secondly, we also look into the issue of strengthening the legal framework which the commissioner is talking about. It needs to be strengthened vis-a-vis in light of the COVID situation, the enforcement. Because if we don't strengthen and we make sure that the rule of the law must prevail, if we are saying these conventions are protecting the children, they do indeed provide such strong protection, which remains on paper if the rule of the law does not prevail. They have a right to be protected. And so what? If this right is not protected, what happens? But social protection is at the heart of it all, because it goes deeper, because the real depth of this problem is into the issue of livelihoods.
Indeed, and I can also see Mr. Alex Asimwe itching to actually give you his submissions on that same topic. But then, first, I'm still with you, Ms. Jacqueline. How has the International Labour Organization repurposed its resources on one side and operations on the other side to mitigate the devastating effects of this pandemic?
As I told you, this for evidence, there's a research that has been done. A report is going to be launched, because strategies that are being drawn now, there's a prioritization. And definitely social protection is coming in as one of the key areas. And also we look at social dialogue in this whole thing, the solutions through social dialogue, dialoguing with the other parties that I have mentioned, the tripartite, the government, the workers, and employers. Social dialogue is part of this, the source of solution. And not only that, when we do support the strengthening, actions on the ground, real action programs are being now designed, tailored to respond to the needs on the ground based on the findings that so far we have got from the recent documentation, like in the case of Uganda. We have a project, in fact, that is going, first of all, to make sure there's a baseline. We're now working with the Uganda Bureau of Statistics to ensure that we have fresh, up-to-date data. We're working with the government, of course. So once we have this data, it's going to inform, and then we can design specific interventions that will deal. We know the magnitude, the size of the problem we're dealing with. On the other hand, we also want to look into the awareness. because a lot of awareness raising. What we're trying to say is that, for goodness sake, even if there's poverty, let's not exploit children and use that, compromise their standards.
Yes.
In the midst of the COVID, we're saying, please, let's protect them. Even if there's disaster and crisis, let's not compromise the children, their rights, and have them protected in the midst of all that. So physically, when I'm saying physical, I mean actions, translating action on the ground. We're working with a cross-section of actors, because the International Labour Organization does not do actual implementation, but we support with the technical support, and the programs that come are also funded, and are specific, like this specific one is tailored towards child labor in the agricultural supply chains. The entire supply chain needs to be addressed, and that's why the role of the private sector comes in also very strong. And of course, government, as the one setting the rules and the framework and the policy, has to adapt and have the review of these policies to reflect the reality on the ground and the effect. So the real impact, far-reaching, I must say that progress may be slowed, but we are not going to lose to this battle of the COVID pandemic. And we're saying in the middle of it, let's not lose out on the children. Let's protect them.
Indeed, let's protect the children. Alexis Imwe, Ms. Jacqueline actually stresses an important point. She does say that in Uganda here, we have the problem of poor or weak social protection tools that do not go far enough to offer that environment that will eliminate child labor. What do you have to say about that?
I think what we needed to understand, and Jackie speaking from, the angle she is speaking from, is that, quality, because the point should be, do we have interventions to address child labor? Yes. Now, quality is a continuous improvement. For instance, I've given you an example that we have increased enrollment in primary to about 8 million, meaning that if we had not targeted that intervention, the situation would be worse.
But we still have 2 million children in labor.
But previously it was even worse, I can tell you. So we are addressing that. We only need to wait and see the next assessment, what it will give us. Then 2, we have social protection interventions. For instance, you have seen that even during this COVID, government put aside resources to provide free food to some families. We have healthcare system, free immunization. By the way, that's a serious intervention, immunization. And that's why you see, the many people, when they are talking about that Uganda has a young population, you know why it has a young population? It's because government has put robust interventions that are able to ensure that these young people are able to grow. Because previously, the mortality rate of these children. But now we have strong healthcare system at the lower level. But that's not to say that we have reached at the zenith. No, we need to improve. And these social protection, like free education, free healthcare services in government hospital, is a social protection intervention.
But we'd like to know at this point in time, what are some of those challenges that have impeded your efforts to successfully implement these measures? Because if you say UPE is around and children can enroll and we are still seeing 2 million, there must be a challenge that is in this sphere. What is it?
Now, the challenge is, many, I can say. Some emanate from the mindset. The mindset. The parents think, some parents think, that for a child to grow and become resilient, must do hard work. And that's wrong, because our laws of Uganda provide that a child below 12 years is not supposed to be in employment. But also, importantly, that the children 14 years can do work, right work, under the supervision of somebody who is 18 years. Then another challenge that we have seen is HIV. HIV came in, and affected many people, many families. So we had many orphans. We have disasters that have also affected some families, and thereby affecting the way of life of these families. Then another challenge that we have seen of recent is this, the family breakdown. The family breakdown, and maybe it stems from this, I don't know whether it is globalization from the, when you analyze it, you wonder why, husband and wife cannot live in harmony in there. Because once there are fights, then the children get out.
And what is causing the fights? Poverty, like Ms. Jacqueline mentioned.
No, actually, let me tell you. Do you know that this gender violence is even in serious homes who are earning heavily? Actually, even you find that these people who are in ties in serious offices, when they go home, the home is a theater of ring, of boxing. So the issue is that we need to identify why is it that this time is the family is becoming a theater of wars, internal wars, because that sends away children to go and find what to eat, to find what to earn, and do something. So that social breakdown, we need to look at it and see how to address it from a holistic point of view.
Ms. Jacqueline.
Yes.
Humble submissions to what he was saying. Yeah. Especially the fact that he's saying that it's not only in the poor households, even the rich households, you have some fights. So it's not about money only. I
think you saw me smile because the commissioner, I want to appreciate what the commissioner has explained, because it tells you that there are very many factors involved. You cannot single out one. And I appreciate the mitigation measures to contain. When I want to focus on our theme again, there are a lot of efforts that have been made. We want to give credit to the government of Uganda to contain and to mitigate the pandemic. But what we're trying to say is that in this response, let the children be top priority in all the response to this crisis. Let the children be at the heart of it. That is it. And what the commissioner is saying, we cannot want to admit, but poverty is a root cause, is one of the root causes. So all these other causes, some of them are secondary, but at the root cause of all this is actually poverty that drives children out of school, that makes the parents not afford education, that, and all the basics, and they cannot even send them to the school with all the, whatever. It goes back to poverty. Not being able to feed them properly, not being able to, everything really goes back that. That's why it's a root cause. But there are other factors, of course, like the domestic violence that the commissioner is elaborating on, which we are making headlines on recently. But we are saying, let's have decisive response, policy response, that are deliberate, putting children at the forefront in every response measure that is being designed. If we have them and we're sensitive to these issues that we are saying about their rights being protected, then that's the message we are driving.
But then what is the role of the international community? How can the world community get firmly on track toward eliminating child labor?
The partnership that I was telling you about, because if you talk of international community, it's quite broad.
Yes. It's
quite broad. And I just mentioned to you one new initiative, the Alliance 8.7, is a partnership that is bringing on board not only the UN agencies, but we also have international organizations and the NGOs, the workers, the employers, the government, all in this partnership to see that we drive action towards the achievement, strengthening partnership. I don't have time to break it down, but this is really looking at complementing each other.
True.
And the resource envelope is put together, and to mount pressure in an area where we see this is the most vulnerable. Therefore, it requires the highest to be on top of all the priorities. And not only that, this partnership goes beyond resources together. It goes like complementing each other. because we all have different mandates.
Like a concerted effort.
Yes, like you see, UNICEF is doing a lot in social protection systems. The International Labour Organization, on the other hand, is setting the standards in the issue of work, the area of work. WHO is doing something in the area of health, agriculture.
And individuals, what can they do? What role can they play?
As individuals in the nationals.
Yes.
As you, if you talk about individuals.
Individuals in Uganda and elsewhere in the world. As a person, as Romeo Busiku, what can I do?
What can you do in your small way? You must be aware. That is why the awareness the Commissioner did mention has to be a big issue. You must know that child labor is dangerous. You must know its effects, its long-term effects. That's why the potential, I was telling you about the potential human resource, if it's destroyed, you know, what danger does it cause? If they don't know the effect, so you have a role in your small way to make sure that in your own household, starting with yourself, you are not doing this vice, practicing it. You look at your neighbor, your most immediate neighbor. You make sure we have a system whereby we even have communities, villages. People need to be aware of the communities that this is a danger. They don't see it now until they know what the effect is in terms of the development of our nation. Socioeconomic impacts is not known until this awareness is created, until understanding is created, and appreciation for education. Education as a tool of getting children out of child labor, as the alternative, you know, as I told you, the occupation for children. Until that is understood, until the value is appreciated, this awareness and sensitization needs to be massive.
Amazing. Ms. Alex Asimwe, final remarks as we call it wraps.
I would like to request Ugandans to take child labor as a very serious national issue. And as a government, we have put down the laws, the policies, and institutional framework. We have over 159 labor officers across the country that are mandated to withdraw and integrate these children from child labor into the schooling system. That now that the schools are suspended or are closed because of the pandemic, they should not, families should not use it as an excuse to send these children into the child labor work. We should ensure that children are protected, they are given the care that is deserved, that is in line with international and national norms. And in case you see any incidents or cases of child labor, please report to the nearest local council, LC1, and the labor officers or the labor officers in the districts and in municipalities and sub-counties. And today, again, we recognize and appreciate the contribution of government in addressing this issue. That's why we are commemorating the World Day Against Child Labor. Government and social partners, employers, workers, civil society organizations, development partners like ILO. This is the time now we take stock and appreciate and recognize the efforts. We are saying let's continue ensuring that we remove all children from child labor.
Amazing. Ms. Asimwe Alex, together with Ms. Jacqueline Banya, many thanks for having made the time to speak to us. Well, the conversation has been centered around protecting children from child labor. Almost 1 in 10 children worldwide are in forced and child labor. That is a very, very worrying statistic, and it's a concerted effort, like hinted by Jacqueline Banya, that we all as a community should work so hard to ensure that we eliminate child labor from our communities as a whole. My name is Romeo Busiku. Let's take a very short break. We'll be right back with more information. Keep it here on Morning